Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that is, well, statistically speaking, absolutely everywhere, yet it remains almost entirely cloaked in silence. I mean, think about this. It accounts for maybe 35 to 50% of all internet traffic.
It's staggering.
Right. And over 90% of men, more than 60% of women, in Western cultures anyway, have consumed it. Sites like Pornhub, billions of visits every year. That's more traffic than many major social platforms combined.
Yeah, the scale is just immense.
And here's something really striking. Most people, studies show, start viewing this stuff during adolescence. Often, before they've had any real meaningful sex education.
Which is a huge part of the problem.
Exactly. So the big question just hangs there. How is it that something so ubiquitous, so baked into our digital lives, stays so unspoken, hidden away?
And that silence, our sources are really clear on this. It does profound damage. It's not just quiet. It actively breeds guilt, secrecy, can distort intimacy, especially when it ends up replacing actual connection.
Right, a stand-in.
Totally. And for young people with no real education, it leaves them totally alone to figure things out, often driving them straight to this content. And on a bigger scale, this silence actually props up exploitative systems because ethical concerns just don't get aired out. Think about the personal impact. Obsession, maybe repression, a constant fear of being found out.
Yeah.
Then relationally, you get these wildly mismatched expectations.
Yeah, I can see that.
And culturally, we just kept talking about ethical production, body image, consent, addiction, real education.
Yeah.
All of it. So the critical question we need to ask is, how do we move from this silence to understanding? Not to shame, not to glorify, but just clarity.
And that's exactly our mission today. We want to assure you this deep dive is all about curiosity. It's not about judgment, definitely not advocacy. We know talking about this stuff can feel, well, uncomfortable, but like our sources often suggest, that discomfort, it often signals that some truth is bumping up against repression.
That's a great way to put it.
Our goal for you, listening, is to gain a well-rounded understanding, move past assumptions, maybe even find some validation for your own experiences or questions, all within a thoughtful educational frame. Ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've touched on the huge cultural silence. But what's actually happening, like fundamentally, inside our bodies, our brains, when we engage with this?
Right.
Our sources map out the general physiology of arousal and orgasm. For all genders, it starts as this powerful cascade of neural signals. Your brain sends messages down, blood flow increases.
Things going.
Exactly. Key brain areas jump in the hypothalamus, driving basic urges, the amygdala processing emotions, and crucially, the reward center's ventral tegmental area. Nucleus accumbens, they flood us with dopamine.
Dopamine, the pleasure chemical.
That familiar hit, yeah. All this leads to more blood flow to erogenous zones, higher heart rate, and then the physical responses building to orgasm and release.
And if we dig a bit deeper there, for males, ejaculation usually has two parts. Emission, where fluids mix, and then expulsion, the muscle contractions. After that, you get a spike in prolactin that lowers arousal and dopamine drops. Meanwhile, oxytocin and serotonin often rise, leading to relaxation, maybe sleepiness. And then there's the refractory period.
Right, the recovery time.
Yeah, it makes it hard to get aroused again right away. For females, orgasm involves pelvic muscle contractions, a big oxytocin increase, especially with emotional arousal. Many women don't really have a refractory period, might have multiple orgasms. And what's often missed is how contextual and emotional female arousal is. It involves the limbic system, memory, imagination, not just visual cues.
That's a key difference.
It really is. Now, here's where it gets super insightful. Whether it's solo stimulation or with a partner, the brain's core arousal processing is similar. But porn, it changes the delivery.
How so?
It creates this huge dopamine spike, massive reward signal, but without the complexity or vulnerability of real intimacy.
Ah, okay. Just the hit, none of the risk.
Kind of. And this can really fuel novelty seeking. Constant tab switching, escalating to more extreme stuff. It actually mimics addictive patterns, like gambling or even junk food.
Wow.
Our sources definitely highlight the risks of repeated overstimulation. Desensitization, basically. Needing more just to feel something. For younger men, this might even contribute to ED or less satisfaction with real partners.
That cheap dopamine loop idea, it really makes you think. So, okay, beyond the chemistry, the neuro stuff,
Right.
why do people actually use this? Is it just curiosity, stress relief, or like something deeper?
Yeah, I mean, the motivations our sources point to are all over the map. Could be boredom, loneliness, fantasy, avoidance, sometimes just habit,
Routine.
Exactly. For some, it's clearly intentional pleasure. For others, it's definitely an emotional coping thing.
And over time, what are the mental risks that can crop up?
Well, several things. People might develop unrealistic expectations about sex, bodies, relationships, which can then lead to isolation or trouble connecting genuinely.
Maybe.
There's also a big risk of internalized shame or guilt and developing compulsive behavior, especially if someone's stressed or dealing with past trauma.
So how do we tell the difference? What does healthy use look like versus unhealthy?
Good question. Healthy use typically involves self-awareness, intention. It's for pleasure or maybe stress relief, not just escaping feelings. It doesn't mess with daily life or relationships. No escalating or compulsive patterns.
Okay.
Real intimacy still feels important and reachable. And emotionally, afterwards, it's neutral or positive, no lingering shame or despair.
And there are red flags for unhealthy use.
Pretty clear, usually. Escalation, needing more extreme stuff to get aroused. Compulsion, feeling unable to stop even when it interferes with life, sleep, goals. Emotional numbing, using it to avoid anxiety or loneliness, which just spirals. Then there are relational impacts, losing interest in partners, more secrecy, even physical issues sometimes. The big question is always, when does it cross that line?
Are there general differences, say, between male and female patterns here?
Our sources suggest some general tendencies, yeah. For men, first exposure tends to be earlier, maybe 10 to 14, often driven more by visual cues. Use can be more frequent, habitual. Shame might focus on performance or addiction fears, plus that refractory period, and maybe a higher risk of compulsive viewing.
Okay. And for women?
Onset often a bit later, maybe 12 to 17. A mix of visual, emotional, mental cues. Use patterns might be more contextual, cyclical. Shame responses often tied more to guilt, secrecy, social taboos. No refractory period usually. Escalation risks seem more linked to filling an emotional void, perhaps.
Interesting distinctions. So we've covered the potential downsides, which is crucial. But what about the flip side? Our sources do suggest real benefits to sexual release masturbation, partnered sex for overall health.
Absolutely. There's evidence for that.
Like that big 2016 study in European urology, it found men who ejaculated more often, 21 plus times a month in their 20s and 40s, had a significantly lower risk of prostate cancer later on.
The theory being it might help flush things out, reduce cellular stress, something like that.
And beyond cancer risk, orgasms can temporarily lower blood pressure, improve circulation, maybe even boost immune function, releasing immune globulins, and mentally. Reduces cortisol, that stress hormone, increases dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, leading to better mood, sleep, less anxiety.
Yes, but, and this is really vital, but we have to add nuance, the actual benefit depends so much on the context. The frequency, the motivation, how psychologically integrated it is for you.
Okay, so it's not just about frequency.
Not at all. For instance, frequent masturbation driven by compulsion or anxiety avoidance or numbing out, that can actually desensitize the reward system, create guilt cycles, interfere with real motivation or intimacy.
So it could backfire.
Exactly. That's the cheap dopamine loop. Again, intense short-term reward, but maybe long-term dullness or dissatisfaction. Overstimulation from porn, especially the really novel or extreme stuff, can kind of train the brain to respond only to those artificial triggers.
Potentially reducing real-life arousal.
Potentially, yeah. Or emotional engagement. And physically.
Yeah.
Less common, but things like death grip syndrome, from maybe too rough or consistent masturbation, can desensitize nerves, maybe impair erection response. Habitual patterns might sometimes lead to delayed ejaculation.
Okay, so context is key.
Absolutely. Which brings us to some essential reflection questions for you, the listener. Are you doing this out of pleasure, or is it more about avoidance? Afterwards, does it energize you or leave you feeling depleted? And ultimately, is this aligned with your deeper values, your relationships?
That's a really useful framework.
Okay.
Okay, let's widen the lens now. Let's talk about society, culture, and the taboos around sex education itself. Why is it still so controversial?
Oh boy. Yeah, our sources point to a few powerful forces. You've got purity culture and certain religious views linking sex tightly to sin. There's that persistent false belief that just talking about sex makes kids experiment earlier.
Which the data doesn't support.
Exactly the opposite, actually. Then there's a deep adult discomfort with childhood autonomy, especially for girls and LGBTQ+ youth. And this pervasive fear that sex ed will somehow mirror hypersexualized media instead of being a vital counter-narrative.
It's like we're scared to equip them.
And what's really striking is how our current, mostly shame-based model often just completely backfires. Take the talking makes them do it idea totally wrong.
Yeah.
Comprehensive sex ed actually delays first intercourse and boosts safe practices.
Right.
Kids are already getting exposed to media, online, peers. Education gives them the context they desperately need. The problems with shame are stark. It pushes everything into secrecy, stops kids asking for help, increases guilt over natural feeling.
And then leaves a vacuum.
Exactly. A massive void where porn becomes the default sex educator. It's terrible. Instead, we could normalize age-appropriate conversations, center consent and empathy really early on.
Make pleasure speakable.
Yes. Acknowledge sex can be pleasurable and respectful instead of letting shame dominate. The goal isn't killing sexuality. It's decentering shame and recentering values. Asking kids, what kind of relationships do you want? How do you respect yourself and others? What do safety, intimacy, integrity really look like?
I love that analogy you mentioned earlier. Teaching kids about fire helps them not get burned. It's about safety and respect, not pretending it doesn't exist.
Precisely.
This leads into deeper societal stuff, too. Our sources talk about this cultural double bind around sexuality is seen as both empowerment and vulnerability.
Express it. You might be judged. Repress it. You're repressed. Lose-lose.
And the tension between Western individualism, freedom, choice, versus more communal or religious conservatism focusing on collective morality.
Big tension there.
And the ongoing debate about porn itself. Is it just a mirror of society's desires, coping, fantasy, maybe even art? Or is it this corrupting force that dehumanizes?
And stepping back, you absolutely can teach both cultural ethics and biological truth. Empower youth to figure out their own moral compass with good information.
Right.
We also see these deep feminist conflicts. Some argue porn liberates women. Others say it profoundly reinforces objectification and harm.
Yeah.
Capitalism plays a huge role. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, often driven by profit more than ethics and shame. It's used subtly, powerfully, as a social tool to regulate behavior, especially around sex. The idea being, if people feel bad about desire, maybe they're easier to control.
Why do these disagreements just persist so strongly?
Because sex is so deeply tied to identity. Challenges feel personal. Many of us weren't given healthy models for understanding sex, so we replicate silence or shame out of fear. Society just lacks a shared language for this complex stuff. What's empowering for one is immoral for another. And emotional baggage from childhood, trauma creates unconscious biases. Ultimately, sex forces us to confront mortality, intimacy, vulnerability. It's inherently uncomfortable, even for adults.
Okay, let's zoom in now specifically on pornography, its role today. Why is it legally restricted to adults? What are the deeper reasons?
Right. The legal and cultural lines are mostly drawn around psychological readiness. That prefrontal cortex handling judgment, impulse control, emotional regulation isn't fully baked until around 25.
So early exposure can really warp things?
Yeah, skew expectations, cause confusion, reinforce shame, maybe stimulate compulsive reward seeking without any real emotional context or mature understanding. Legally, 18 is the threshold for consent accountability, and porn involves morally complex stuff children aren't deemed ready for.
Plus developmental harm concerns.
Definitely. Research suggests exposure to violent or degrading porn young can impact empathy, maybe influence aggression, distort body image.
Which brings us to this huge cultural contradiction you mentioned.
Exactly. We basically tell young people, don't watch it, don't ask, you'll probably see it anyway, just don't talk about it.
But the internet doesn't care about those rules.
Not at all. It's bypassed them completely. Average age of first exposure, shockingly young. 11 to 13, often accidental. Most kids see porn before any formal sex ed.
Wow.
And algorithms, they don't filter for developmental appropriateness, they just optimize for clicks, for engagement. So the real question is, if the internet already breaks the rules, why are we all pretending it doesn't?
Yeah, it's a willful blindness almost. Our sources describe porn as a mirror of desire, but a distorted one. Not inherently good or bad, just a reflection.
A highly produced reflection.
And the distortions are often pretty stark. Performative, unrealistic sex focused on spectacle, not connection. Objectification bodies as tools, no emotional context. Hypermasculinity, hyperfemininity reinforcing narrow, often problematic gender roles. And often a really troubling lack of consent narratives. Fast, aggressive scenes, silent on mutual desire, its power. Tapping directly into those dopamine and fantasy loops. Illusion of control, instant gratification, endless novelty.
While completely bypassing the vulnerability of real human connection.
Yeah.
Replacing it with of performance.
Yeah.
So when we debate raising or lowering the age for porn access, it's complicated.
Very. Arguments for raising the age, tightening rules. Focus on that vulnerable adolescent brain addiction risk, fantasy entrenchment. Early exposure can really impact sexual identity development, especially if it's the main teacher before they grasp real intimacy or consent.
Makes sense.
On the other hand, arguments for lowering the age or just changing the frame. They acknowledge kids are already seeing it. So instead of useless blocks, they need tools, understanding, context.
So education becomes key.
Exactly. Ethical porn literacy, comprehensive sex ed, critical media skills.
Yeah.
These could actually help teens develop healthier relationships with desire and sexuality. It's not about stopping them seeing sex. It's about stopping them seeing distorted sex divorced from empathy, context, humanity. Pretending they won't see it does more harm. The real goal isn't exposure or prohibition. It's literacy.
That completely reframes it. Okay, let's shift now to the absolutely critical ethical dimension. Our sources are clear. Ethical porn isn't about what you see. It's about how it's made and who benefits or suffers.
Crucial distinction.
So signs of ethical production: informed, enthusiastic consent from everyone, fair pay, safe conditions, no coercion, transparent communication about scenes, aftercare for performers, real effort towards diverse, equitable representation, which is the total opposite of unethical stuff.
Yeah.
Revenge porn, non-consensual uploads, deepfakes, anything with underage performers, stolen content spread for free, often with platforms profiting.
Yeah, the dark side is very dark. And when we ask who's harmed or helped, the ripple effect of our choices becomes clear. For the user, risk of addiction, distorted views, maybe supporting exploitation without realizing, but also potentially positive. Exploring fantasy, orientation, finding representation, stress relief
Right.
for the performer. Real physical risks, potential coercion, trauma, but also maybe empowerment, financial independence, self-representation, if boundaries are truly respected.
A big if.
Huge. Industry workers behind the scenes, often low wages, no benefits, platform owners. Huge profits, often little ethical reinvestment. And for society, harms include commodifying bodies, perpetuating silence, flooding algorithms with extreme stuff, influencing kids before they get consent. But done ethically, it could foster open talk about pleasure, diversity.
And those ethical gray areas, like amateur content.
Big gray area. Are performers protected? Is consent real under financial pressure? And viewer responsibility-free sites often run on stolen or unethically made content. Our consumption has consequences.
So what does responsibility look like for you, the listener, as a viewer then?
Our sources suggest support paid, ethical creators or platforms with clear consent policies, actively avoid pirated stuff, and just reflect. What is your consumption reinforcing about race, gender, power, empathy?
And for society.
Better media literacy and sex ed, so porn isn't the only teacher. Protecting sex workers, labor rights, healthcare, shifting the culture of porn itself towards care, diversity, safety, not just extremes and anonymity.
So can porn actually be ethical?
Our sources say yes, absolutely. But only when it moves from being just a commodity to a conversation.
Centering consent over control.
Pleasure over performance, autonomy over algorithms. Yes. The truly insightful question isn't, is porn good or bad? It's, what kind of world are we participating in when we consume this? And maybe more importantly, how can we reshape it to honor, not harm, our collective humanity?
That's powerful. Okay, let's go to the deepest level now. Philosophy. Ultimately, what does our very complex relationship with the P word reveal about being human?
Our sources suggest, well, we're deeply wired creatures of desire, boundless imagination, constantly craving novelty. Yet paradoxically, we also crave control over intimacy. Maybe we fear vulnerability even more than we fear sex itself. So porn isn't just about sex, it's about yearning, wanting to feel something, maybe wanting to feel less alone even while disconnected.
And connecting that to the bigger picture.
It starkly shows how desire has been intensely monetized. Porn is the commodification of intimacy, a $1 trillion global market built on climax without connection. We sell sex aggressively, but punish sexual honesty. We silence talk about masturbation while openly profiting from its automation. We've made sexuality more accessible, sure, but arguably much less human.
So the critical question becomes,
Is porn a response to our disconnection? Or is it a significant cause of it? We're so confused about agency and shame. Society says, be sexually empowered, but don't be too sexual. Be desirable, but not overt. Porn is often where repressed culture just crashes headlong into unfiltered desire.
Our sources post some really profound questions for you, the listener. Is our current relationship with porn truly healthy? Individually, societally.
It varies wildly.
For some, yeah, it's liberation, exploration, coping. For others, it's compulsive, numbing, isolating. That line between healthy ritual and addiction, it's thin. Emotional honesty seems key. As a society, we seem functionally addicted to porn, but spiritually allergic to talking about it. We say we protect kids from porn, but fail to protect them from the pornified culture all around them. We advance tech, AI, porn, deepfakes, parasocial intimacy, sex bots way faster than our ethics, without asking, what is this actually doing to us? We've maybe normalized fantasy and forgotten the importance of integration.
And what's genuinely insightful here, the final thought perhaps, is that porn isn't just about sex. It's a powerful mirror.
Reflecting what?
Our relationship to power, our fear of rejection, our craving for control, our collective inability to talk openly about sexuality, our disconnection from self, from others. We don't need to cancel it or glorify it or fear it. We need to understand it and integrate what it reveals into a more whole, dignified picture of being human.
So it's not about erasing desire.
No, it's about anchoring desire in dignity, honesty, and conscious reflection.
So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for you listening? Our deep dive really suggests we absolutely need to talk about porn more, but wiser, deeper, more honestly. Not to normalize it uncritically, but to contextualize it, to really understand it. That needs a constructive approach. Compassionate curiosity, thoughtful context, not just anecdotes. Grounding it in multiple lenses: science, psychology, ethics, society, philosophy.
This isn't a conversation we have because it's easy. It's one we have because the silence has such a profound, measurable cost.
Yeah.
Until we break that silence, really address these contradictions, society will keep punishing people, often inadvertently, for expressing the very thing it secretly profits from.
So ultimately, this deep dive is an encouragement for you to treat your own desires, habits, contradictions with curiosity and compassion. To advocate for sex with yourself or others that is conscious, consensual, communicative, and maybe to be one of the voices normalizing honest conversation without losing sight of ethics. Because when we finally turn on that light, really see, we gain the power to choose. Not just consume, but question, understand, and profoundly grow.